What's that sound? It's For Amusement Only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. Tonight I wanted to talk about 1962's Funspot 63. Funspot 63 was one of the Ohio Dime games, but before I get into that, I wanted to talk about what makes a bingo pinball machine such a unique experience. That is that it is a multi-coin machine. Typically, you walk up and drop your coin in, the game resets and lifts your first ball. And normally, at this point, you have to put in more coins in an attempt to light additional features or move your odds. In order to win, you have to get 3, 4, or 5 in a row on the bingo card on the Backglass. Funspot 63 is a 6-card bingo game. That means there are 6 different cards with different arrangements of the 25 numbers which are represented on the bingo playfield. There's a 26th hole down at the bottom center of the bingo playfield, and if you manage to snake your ball all the way down to that, it will be returned back to you at no penalty. In a typical bingo pinball game, if you get 3, 4, or 5 in a row, you win the indicated number of replays on either the Backglass or the score and instruction cards. However, on Funspot 63, because it was one of the Ohio Dime games, you earned a certain amount of score. Now, after I put out my last episode, Jeffrey Lawton, the author of Bally Bingo Pinball Machines, from which I am familiar with the phrase Ohio Dime games, sent me some messages about the Ohio Dime games in particular, Funspot 61 and 62. He says, "You spoke about Funspot 61 and 62, stating that it started by itself. I don't think that this was true. It's my experience that the player always had to pay for the first card no matter how many points they'd scored. The rub with single coin derivations was that you had to pay 25 cents for 6 cards. So you win 400 points and play the 400 points buying 4 of the 6 cards. So what do you do if you want to play cards 5 and 6? That's right, you have to buy them. Well, there's only one coin slot, so you pay 25 cents for cards 5 and 6. In Ohio, you always had to pay, hence Ohio Dime game. Even if you had 20,000 points, you still had to pay for the first card. And I want to thank Jeffrey for sending that information to me because, yeah, it's just been a bit of a mystery to me why exactly these games were produced, but this makes a lot more sense. So, I had mentioned in those previous episodes that the games, if you won, would simply automatically start a new game for you. But instead, what Jeffrey's saying is that you always had to drop in your first coin. So they would automatically tick up based on the number of points you had, up to the number of cards, if you had that many points. But you always had to put in the first coin in order to activate the countdown, I suppose you'd say. And I suppose I'm still a little fuzzy on what made this more viable than the other bingos, because in those situations he mentioned where you didn't have enough points, you had to put in additional coins. And he mentioned separate coin slots, so some of the very, very early bingo style games that we've talked about on this show, from the 30s, which had separate coin slots for each card, that makes a little more sense. But in this case, you're paying a coin to play the game, and then if you don't have enough points earned from the previous game or games to cover the spread, then you have to pay in additional money. And typically at a dime a pop. Now, this FunSpot 63 is pretty much an exact clone of FunSpot 62. The only difference really is in the cabinet artwork, which I'll link in the show notes as usual. And the backglass is very, very slightly altered, but otherwise it's the exact same game. So, remember, if you win score on a bingo, it's not the same thing at all as if you won free games. But again, what muddies the water is that you're essentially earning free games by having that score. So it's just an interesting little gray area that they painted themselves into. So let's talk about the artwork. You've got the woman leaving the barrel, being scared by or holding the balloon. I'm not sure which. The points are illustrated all around the outside of the barrel and on the balloon itself. And then you've got a close-up of the woman in front of carnival games with a banner that says FunSpot 63. Each of the 6 bingo cards is below, the first being red, second green, third orange, fourth blue, fifth brown, and sixth purple. Now, similar to shoot a line, or light a line, there is a yellow line of numbers, which is one row up from the bottom on each of the cards. If you were to win 3, 4, or 5 in a row on these yellow lines on those bingo cards, then you would likely win more score than if you had 3, 4, or 5 in a row on any of the white lines which make up the rest of the bingo cards. I'm still very much in favor of any omnipresent feature that's going to help the player or entice the player to shoot for it in such a way. I think it's a pretty cool idea, especially on a game that has no moving numbers, no selections, no extra balls. It gives you something to shoot for every single time you play the game, which is a little different than the random action on later 6 cards that can grant a super line on a particular card. So, your cabinet on FunSpot 63 is red with a white swoosh that kind of goes all the way from the front top of the cabinet down to the bottom center and up into the back box. You've got some blue triangular shapes which point, one of which points towards the front of the cabinet and the other points down towards the bottom of the head. Centered on the cab is a gold star with some blue triangular light shine coming off of it. And same for the head. And you've got a couple other stars on either side of that one large main star centered on the cabinet. And I happen to like this cabinet art. I think it's pretty nice. Now this brings us to the end of our discussion of Ohio Dime games. This is the last one that they produced. If you'll recall, all of the Ohio Dime games, the ones with fun in the title, had a carnival theme. And the carnival wouldn't be revisited until Big Wheel, which came in 1968, so much, much later. Now, next episode would have been Golden Gate, but we covered that back in episode 187. And so the next one would be Silver Sails, but we covered that back in episode 190. those two sister games are some of the top Magic Screen games that were produced. And so if you're unfamiliar with those games, you should give those episodes a listen, because it talks about the very unique feature for those games. And then there's Bounty, which was made in 1963, and that we talked about back on episode 181. That's another one that you should go back and listen to if you haven't heard it, because in that one I talk about the skill shot feature, which is unique to that machine, and it is fairly interesting, and is something that I always play for. I always have an extra nickel for that feature, because it is so much fun. And so our next episode is actually going to bring us into the Mystic Lines era. And with that, we get our first 20-hole machine in chronological order. So I'm looking forward to talking about that tomorrow. But for tonight, thank you very much for listening. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast, or you can listen to us on our website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.